Now, the vast majority of you watching this video at home will be well aware of the supposed motive for the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe as put forward by Darren Nicholls during the trial. We had the fact that Darren Nicholls claims that Michael Steele and Jack Womes were heading there to meet Pat to smooth things over and embark on a possible new venture regarding a cocaine shipment. Now, the motive for the murder itself revolved around Pat Tate not paying back money to his investors and then blaming Mickey Steele for that loss of money. This got back to Michael Steele. Michael Steele also heard about subsequent threats on his life from Pat Tate, and it was at this point that Michael Steele decided that he needed to take action. Now, in the interest of giving you all of the factual information concerning this point, we need to go back to Darren Nicholls' official statement under oath again, where I'm going to read a very small section out so that you are aware of Darren Nicholls' final version of events and the motive for these murders. Remember that this statement was made in October 1996, and it's in this statement that Darren Nicholls states the following. There was conversation as to why it happened with Mick. Roughly, it was when the money had been returned from the bad drug deal. A lot of the money Pat had put into it wasn't his. He had borrowed it, and what Pat decided to do was not repay those people. He would then blame Mick and say he hadn't paid them back. Mick knew this because Sarah had told him, Pat's ex-girlfriend. Pat was telling them he hadn't been paid back, and if he wasn't paid back, he would kill Mick. Now, this video is going to be one of the most important videos that I've made on the channel, and obviously I've made a fair few, and that's a statement that I don't use very often. And as I say, this information I actually found just a few days ago, and it's important that you understand exactly how this process went with Darren Nicholls' early police statements, what he claimed very early on before his statements then morphed and changed into what they eventually became in October 1996, with that official statement under oath. The first part I'm going to read out to you comes from Michael Steele's police interview on the 17th of May 1996, conducted by DC Shakespeare. It's during this interview that Michael Steele is quizzed about the motive for these murders. The investigating officer states the following. Do you know anybody by the name Mr. Steele of Mullock? Mr. Steele, I believe it's spelt Mullock, M-U-L-L-O-C-K. Anything you can tell me about that name? Anybody that you may know by that name? Because it is alleged by Darren Nicholls that you told him that Pat Tate, one of the men who was subsequently murdered, borrowed the sum of £40,000 from the Mullock brothers in relation to the bad cannabis importation. And that money was obviously owed back to the Mullock brothers. They were obviously going to be looking for their money. Does that name mean anything to you? Do those circumstances mean anything to you that I've outlined? It transpires, I understand, from Darren Nicholls that about 1/3 of the poor cannabis that you brought into the country, we say, was sellable, i.e. was of sufficient quality, that you were able to make some money on it, and that Patrick Tate, he says, took those drugs up north somewhere in this country and presumably did with that what he wanted. Well, I wouldn't imagine you'd be very happy about that, would you, Mr. Steele? Would you like to tell me about the relationship that Sarah Saunders has with your common law wife, Jackie Street? Are they friends? Have you ever at any stage, Mr. Steele, paid any monies to Sarah Saunders in relation to property to maintain her lifestyle? On the 8th of the 11th, 95, the day that you bought the bad cannabis importation into the UK, Pat Tate, as my colleagues outlined to you, was arrested on a drink driving charge in Southend whilst he was driving a Porsche belonging to Tony Tucker. That was, of course, the same day, as I've said, that you were stopped on the beach. Were you aware that Pat Tate had in fact been arrested on that same day? Was there ever an occasion, Mr. Steele, when yourself, Patrick Tate and perhaps Darren Nicholls, Sarah Saunders were together at a house to mend a cooker? Does that ring any bells to you at all? Darren Nicholls has told us that. Now, moving on then to the questions with regard to the events that we say happened last year. We mentioned the name of the Mullock brothers, the spelling of which I gave you. If it's incorrect, then I apologise, but certainly a name of that ilk. And I asked you whether you knew anybody of that name, and you obviously maintained your right to silence. Having now had an opportunity to think about it, is there anything that you would like to say about your knowledge of those persons by that name or any dealings that you've ever had in the past? Is it true, Mr. Steele, that you've known Pat Tate for a number of years and that Pat Tate at one stage, for whatever reason, was perhaps getting a little bit too big for his boots within your fraternity, your circles, perhaps getting a little bit above himself? Was that perhaps true? You see, Darren Nicholls has told us that Pat Tate told the Mullock brothers, bearing in mind that the Mullock brothers are still owed quite a substantial quantity of money from your bad cannabis importation. It is alleged that Pat Tate said to the Mullock brothers at one stage that he would put you, Mr. Steele, on your knees before them. That's what Pat Tate said, wasn't it? Have you ever heard from anyone that such a conversation occurred between Pat Tate and the Mullock brothers? Because certainly, if I had heard of that, I wouldn't be very happy that somebody had said that that's what they were going to do to me, as I'm sure perhaps you weren't very happy if that's what you heard. Sarah Saunders is a name that we've mentioned. As we already know, Sarah Saunders was the ex-girlfriend of Patrick Tate. I've asked you questions about your relationship with her, which you've chosen to stay silent about. I've asked you, was there ever an occasion when Sarah Saunders had repeated to you that conversation had taken place with the Mullock brothers? Because Darren Nicholls is telling us that Sarah Saunders certainly did relay that conversation to you. We now take a break from that interview and take a look at Jack Wome's interview from the 16th of May 1996, where the Mullock brothers make yet another appearance. The interviewing officer during this interview is DC Myhill, and he states the following. Have you ever heard of the Mullock brothers? Ever heard of them, Jack? Because Mr. Tate, Patrick Tate, the deceased I should say, is believed to have been in debt to them for £40,000 because of this bad cannabis deal, and he was getting a bit of pressure put on him. And Patrick Tate didn't want to give them their £40,000 back because Mr. Tate, Patrick Tate, I think believed he had become, shall we say, for want of a better word, one of the big drug dealers in this part of Essex. We believe that Patrick Tate, not only was he not giving the Mullocks their money back, but he was saying, I haven't got my money back from Mickey Steele. Do you understand that? So again, there was some bad feeling coming from other people as regards to Mr. Steele. And obviously, as far as we're concerned, you. Because you're connected with Mickey. So what's Mickey going to do about it? He's getting an awful lot of pressure now. He's saying to Pat that he's got the chance of a big job. A big job lined up, ripping somebody off. Have you heard of that before, Jack? Did Mick tell you about that? Allegedly, it was to do with 30 kilos of cocaine. And Mickey was going to bring that in by plane. Did you know anything about that deal? Being Mick's right-hand man, I suggested that he'd confide that in you. And the idea that Tate and Tucker would rob this firm of the cocaine, meaning the people that were financing the deal for Mick to go out and bring the stuff in when it landed, Tate and Tucker were going to have it for themselves, because they were big league now. Somewhere along the lines, this all gets rather clouded. People are, well, Mickey's getting rather concerned as to quite whether he can trust Tate and Tucker. Did he tell you that at all? Did Mick say that he was getting a bit concerned about Pat Tate and Tucker? Now, you're not going to believe this when I tell you who the Mullock brothers are. When I'd seen this before in the statements, I thought, they've changed the name here somewhere, They're doing this on purpose so that the real identity of the investors is hidden, hidden from the public or whatever. That was my opinion anyway. But something in my mind kept telling me, the Mullock brothers, there's something in this. There's definitely something in this. And I've seen something about this before. So I went back and I looked at the Operation Century blog, which was written by Ian Cameron. And it mentioned there that Darren Nicholls made this huge blunder during questioning as he put forward the motive for the murders as to be connected with the Mullock brothers, the Irish cops. And I thought, I have seen that somewhere before in these statements. So I spent the best part of the day going through these statements, trying to find out who the Mullock brothers are. And lo and behold, I have found it. And here it is. The trial points from the defence, page 3, where the defence has written down here, we clearly know that Nicholls' motive for murder was a £40,000 loan to Tate from the infamous Mullock brothers, and this is a total fabrication, his finest example of fact into fiction to date. The Mullocks, of course, are bungling undercover Irish-speaking cops, Mullock cops. We have to assume, of course, that the Mullock cops have not loaned Tate £40,000 to purchase drugs with. Now, to give you an idea who these people are, do you remember the undercover operation, Operation Sentry, against Michael Steele and Sarah Saunders, which commenced, I believe, at least with Michael Steele, on Thursday the 15th of February 1996? Well, this is Billy and John Mullock. These are the Irish cops. Nicholls has come forward when he's arrested to say that the motive for the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe are the undercover police officers. Now, we know that this cannot be true in any way, shape or form, because Operation Sentry, the first phone call to Michael Steele, doesn't originate until Thursday the 15th of February 1996. So Nicholls is arrested, he's being interviewed, and he said that Steele has told him that the motive for the murders was Billy and John, the Irish cops. But the Irish cops didn't appear until after the murders. So how could that be the motive for the murder? Nicholls has made a ginormous blunder here. It's absolutely ludicrous that Darren Nicholls has the ability to then come back in October 1996, months after these statements are given, months after the interviews with Michael Steele and Jack Holmes have commenced, months after the interrogation to Darren Nicholls has gone through in a thorough manner. It's ludicrous that he is able to change his story from two fictional characters, Billy and John Mullock, who are undercover police officers, to Sarah Saunders told Steele that his life was in danger because he hadn't paid back the money. That's literally what he's done in his official statement. Let me just bring up the official statement once more, just to read that small section at the bottom. There was conversation as why it happened with Mick. Roughly, it was that when the money had been returned from the bad drug deal, a lot of the money that Pat had put into it wasn't actually his. He had borrowed it. And what Pat decided to do was not pay those people back and blame Mick to say he hadn't been paid. Mick knew this because Sarah had told him, Pat's ex-girlfriend. Pat was telling them he hadn't been paid back, and if he wasn't paid back, he would kill Mick. This is his official version of events. It's gone from initial arrest of two officers who were involved in an undercover operation against Steele being the motive for the murders. Can you believe that? The undercover operation against Steele, according to Darren Nicholls, was the motive for the murder. The investigating officers investigating Steele after the murders were committed were the motive for the murders. That's how insane this story really is. Now, the next thing to do for me, I guess, is to go through the cross-examination in court and just see how much was made of this in court. I'm not sure if we have all of the cross-examination of Darren Nicholls, but the defence here, what's going on? What's going on? Why is this not being hammered home that Darren Nicholls was arrested and gave a completely fictitious version or motive for these murders? He seemed very convinced that Mick had told him that the Mullock brothers were owed money. The Mullock brothers were out for blood. Steele had to act because Pat hadn't paid the Mullock brothers back. Crazy. Why did the defence not really hammer this home? It completely discredits Nicholls in my mind, completely. As I say, in this series, we're going through all of the inconsistencies that Darren Nicholls has come up with. If you still wish to believe the books, documentaries, and think it's cut and shut after all this, there's literally no more that I can tell you. What I can say, what my opinion is that Darren Nicholls is lying. There's no other word for it. So many inconsistencies, and this one is embarrassing. I mean, this is embarrassing. I can't even believe that. What's equally as embarrassing is the fact that the police officers are sitting here in this interview room telling Steele that the Mullock brothers are the motive for the murder. The Mullock brothers are police officers. I guess they didn't know about this because it wasn't public knowledge and it was an undercover operation, but still, it's quite embarrassing, isn't it? That the police are actually sitting in this interview room talking about fictitious characters that are threatening Steele after the murders being the motive for the murders themselves. It's crazy, simply crazy.